What happens when one of Australia's most admired young conservationists walks onto what seems like an ordinary morning talk show, expecting a warm conversation, only to find himself caught in the middle of a confrontation he never saw coming? Within moments, a routine interview transforms into one of the most tense and unforgettable live television exchanges in recent memory. And the most surprising part is just how quickly everything unravels, leaving the entire studio frozen in disbelief. But before we get into this remarkable showdown, take a second to subscribe and let me know in the comments. Do you think TV hosts should challenge their guests without first understanding the facts? Because what you're about to see is a perfect example of how poor preparation can turn a simple interview into a public disaster. Robert Irwin, the son of the legendary Steve Irwin, arrived at The View, genuinely excited to share updates about his latest wildlife documentary series and the conservation work that has become his life's purpose. At only 20 years old, he'd already spent days appearing on major programs, winning over audiences everywhere with his kindness, humility, and unwavering commitment to continuing his family's passion for protecting wildlife. Every interview leading up to this one had been welcoming and respectful, allowing Robert's authenticity to shine naturally. But this appearance was about to break that pattern completely. Joy Behar had no interest in another uplifting conversation. She seemed determined to steer the interview in a very different direction. The instant Robert walked onto the stage, the mood noticeably changed. Joy greeted him with a smile that felt more forced than friendly, while the rest of the panel grew unusually quiet, almost as if they sensed what was about to unfold but weren't sure how to stop it, completely unaware of what awaited him. Robert greeted everyone with his signature enthusiasm and warm smile, never realizing he was walking directly into an interview that would soon become anything but friendly. "Welcome back to The View," Joy began, her voice carrying an edge that immediately caught everyone's attention. "Today we're joined by wildlife conservationist Robert Irwin, son of the late Steve Irwin." Then she leaned forward and fixed her attention on him. "Robert, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Robert adjusted slightly in his seat but remained calm. "Of course, Joy," he replied. Without missing a beat, Joy launched into the question she'd clearly been waiting to ask. She said she'd watched his interviews and documentaries, but couldn't shake the feeling that his success existed only because of his father's legacy. Then came the blunt question that instantly changed the atmosphere. What, she wanted to know, had Robert truly achieved on his own? The studio fell silent. You could almost feel the tension settle over the room. Robert's smile faded for only a brief moment before he gathered himself and answered with the composed confidence of someone who had faced similar criticism before. He explained that conservation had been his life's work since childhood, that he'd helped rescue thousands of animals, worked alongside endangered species programs, and dedicated himself completely to protecting wildlife across Australia and beyond. But his answer did nothing to satisfy Joy. She fired back immediately, arguing that he was still living inside his father's legacy instead of creating one of his own. She claimed he copied Steve Irwin in everything, from the way he dressed to the way he spoke, and even mocked his signature khaki outfit, asking when he planned to stop living in his father's shadow and become his own person. The discomfort around the table was impossible to ignore. Whoopi Goldberg looked as though she was considering stepping in, but before anyone else could speak, Joy continued pressing the issue. Robert paused, took a slow breath, and answered carefully. He explained that conservation had never been about personal fame or building a brand. The mission had always come first. Whether he was expanding projects his father had started or creating entirely new initiatives, the purpose remained unchanged: protecting wildlife and preserving the natural world. But Joy dismissed the explanation with a sarcastic scoff and a visible eye roll. Then she crossed a line that stunned the room. She suggested Robert was afraid to build his own identity because he feared he could never live up to his father's reputation. She went even further, telling the 20-year-old it was time to grow up instead of spending his life playing with animals. And that was the moment everything shifted. The friendly smile Robert had worn throughout the interview disappeared completely, replaced by a calm but unmistakably serious expression. Slowly repeating her words, "Playing with animals," his Australian accent became noticeably stronger as he spoke. Then he looked directly at Joy and quietly asked whether she had any real understanding of what his work actually involved. Without raising his voice, he began describing the reality of his life in conservation, starting with the rescue of a mother koala and her Joey trapped in the middle of devastating Australian bushfires. But what happened next would leave the entire studio absolutely speechless. He went on to describe breeding programs that helped return echidnas to parts of Australia where they had disappeared decades earlier. Just as Joy tried to cut him off, Robert continued without raising his voice, speaking with a calm confidence that demanded attention. He explained that he grew up watching his father safely relocate venomous snakes to protect both wildlife and local families. He spoke about helping operate a wildlife hospital that had treated more than 100,000 injured animals over the years. This wasn't some childhood hobby. It wasn't an act or a carefully crafted public image. It was a lifelong responsibility. The studio fell completely silent as every eye remained fixed on him. But instead of recognizing the shift in the room, Joy pressed even harder. She brushed aside his passion as nothing more than emotion and insisted that facts were what truly mattered. Then she delivered another sharp criticism, claiming his popularity existed only because of the Irwin name. Without it, she suggested, he'd simply be another young man pretending to be a zookeeper. She even hinted that perhaps it was time for him to find what she called a real job. And that was the moment everything changed. Robert became perfectly still. The entire room seemed to recognize that pause. The kind that comes just before someone reaches their limit. A real job? He repeated so quietly it almost disappeared beneath the studio microphones. Then he looked directly at Joy and asked a question no one expected. "Do you know what my father was doing on the day he died?" Instantly, Joy's expression shifted. The confidence she had carried throughout the interview seemed to disappear as the audience leaned forward in complete silence. Robert continued, his voice stronger than before. He explained that Steve Irwin had been filming a documentary about stingrays, not for fame or financial gain, but to help people understand animals that had been feared and misunderstood for generations. His father, Robert said, gave his life educating the public and protecting creatures that had no voice of their own. Then he took the conversation even further. "You want to talk about real careers?" he asked. He explained that Steve Irwin could have earned millions by turning Australia Zoo into nothing more than a tourist attraction built around entertainment. Instead, he devoted his life to conservation, education, and protecting wildlife, and Robert said he was proud to continue that mission every single day. For the first time, Joy appeared genuinely shaken. Robert leaned forward and spoke with unmistakable conviction. "Every day," he said, "he works to honor that legacy. Not because he's living in someone else's shadow, but because the mission itself is bigger than any individual." While people argue over personalities, species continue disappearing. While critics laugh about khaki uniforms, animals continue dying. Whoopi attempted to ease the growing tension, but the conversation had already reached a point where there was no turning back. Robert calmly shifted his attention back to Joy. He pointed out that she hadn't asked thoughtful questions or tried to understand his work. Instead, he said, she had attacked his character, dismissed years of conservation efforts, and mocked an entire profession devoted to protecting wildlife. Then he asked her if she would speak the same way to David Attenborough or Jane Goodall. Joy opened her mouth, but nothing came out. The silence that followed spoke louder than any response could have. Robert continued, saying the part that troubled him most was seeing someone criticize a life dedicated to saving animals, while spending their own career offering opinions from behind a television desk. Then he asked a question that sent another wave through the studio. If impact was truly what mattered, how many endangered species had she personally helped protect? Audible gasps spread through the audience. Joy straightened in her chair, visibly unsettled, before making one final attempt to regain control. She insisted that maybe someone simply needed to tell Robert the truth, that not everyone believed he was special because of his famous last name. That proved to be the final straw. Robert stood up immediately. His voice never rose, but every word carried unmistakable weight. "Special because of my name?" he repeated. Then he asked whether she truly understood what that name represented. He explained that it meant waking before sunrise every day to care for animals, learning crocodile behavior as a child, dedicating every moment to conservation, and carrying the enormous responsibility of preserving a mission that had inspired millions around the world. Joy tried to interrupt, urging him to sit back down, but Robert refused. He said he had come expecting an honest conversation, only to be ambushed, have his work belittled, and watch his father's legacy reduced to cheap criticism. And now, he said, she wanted respect in return. Around the studio, staff members shifted uneasily as the tension became impossible to ignore. Robert told Joy that if she truly wanted respect, she should begin by doing proper research, asking meaningful questions, and understanding the difference between creating entertainment and discussing work that genuinely changes lives. Then he calmly removed his microphone. He explained that he had come to the show hoping to talk about endangered species and conservation, but instead the interview had been turned into a personal confrontation for the sake of television ratings. Even so, he thanked Joy for reminding him exactly why he continued his father's work and why protecting wildlife would always matter more than anything happening around that table. He carefully placed the microphone down, turned toward the camera, and delivered one final message. If people genuinely cared about wildlife, he said, they should learn about the conservation work taking place at Australia Zoo because, unlike endless arguments and television drama, those efforts were focused on making the world a better place. With that, Robert Irwin walked off the set. Joy Behar remained frozen in her seat. The panel sat in stunned silence. The audience barely moved as millions of viewers at home struggled to process what they had just witnessed. The cameras lingered just long enough to capture the disbelief across the studio before the program abruptly cut to a commercial break. Whether people agreed with him or not, Robert had stood up not only for himself, but for conservation, his father's legacy, and every animal that cannot speak for itself. Now it's your turn to decide. Was Robert justified in the way he responded, or did Joy take the interview too far? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more unbelievable and unforgettable television moments.